Hello, welcome to Stephen Towns' Declaration and Resistance. My name is Kilolo Luckett, and I'm the curator of the exhibition here at the Boise Art Museum. Stephen Towns is a painter and fiber artist, and he was born in Lincolnville, South Carolina, and he went to school for the fine arts and now lives in Baltimore, Maryland. Stephen Towns' Declaration and Resistance is a show of all new works featuring mixed media paintings and quilts that Stephen made over the course of the pandemic. Stephen Towns' Declaration and Resistance is really about looking at the history of African American and their contributions to building the economy of the United States. Often the history of African Americans gets sidelined, or hidden stories are left untold. And so Stephen and I collaborated to really look at the stories of a wide variety of African Americans. Some that we know, others we wanted to delve deeper into their stories and how they're connected to our founding fathers, and also just ordinary people that are doing wonderful things that we tend to overlook, like people making food for other folks, people that are healthcare workers, that are nurses, that are tending to people in hospitals. Also service people who are fighting every day to make our country safe. So Stephen really wanted to give voice to those people that tend to be overlooked. And also, we looked at educators, people who are bringing knowledge and raising very important stories to share that have been written down in books or in archives that Stephen and I have looked at to really just elevate their voices and illuminate their stories. 35 new works were created for this exhibition, with one work in particular was an existing work called Birth of a Nation, which is right behind me, is one of Stephen's first fiber arts that he made in 2014. Stephen went to school as a fine artist, but also is a self-taught quilt maker. So Birth of a Nation is an installation of a flag, which is suspended above a bed of dirt. Stephen's work, Birth of a Nation, talks about how the hanging of a flag, it has to be hung at a certain height. It can't touch the ground. Also, the figure in Birth of a Nation, the wet nurse, is literally providing nourishment to a white child. While she is an enslaved woman, she is a mother that has her own children. Stephen renders her in this kind of burlap material, and then if you look closely to the details, there are these small details of these white people engaged in these leisurely scenes, which they're actually depictions of a painter by the name of Fragonard. Birth of a Nation is an homage to one of Stephen's sisters, who was a caretaker. And so this is a tribute to her. She passed away, and so Stephen made this quilt in honor of her work. The enslaved woman in Birth of a Nation is literally providing that nourishment to the country through her own labor of physical labor, but also the milk that she provides. As a painter, Stephen is influenced by the Byzantine period. You'll see works with gold and copper leaf, and these beautiful halos that are very much symbolic of saints that you'll see in cathedrals. Stephen looks at everyday people that are in his paintings as people who should be looked at as saints. Stephen was born one of 11 children. He is the youngest, and he was raised as a Jehovah's Witness. He no longer practices, but religion and spirituality play a role in his art making. Some of the themes that we explore in the show are looking at healthcare workers during the Civil War, also healthcare workers during Reconstruction and the Civil Rights, and also the military. So we have the healthcare workers and military people who fought in the various different wars. So if you look at the history of the United States, the early years of the formation of the United States, a lot of our wars were fought through this segregationist lens. So a lot of African Americans were relegated as second-class citizens, and they were separated from their white counterparts. And so some of the people in the paintings and the quilts that Stephen makes, he gives voice to them, such as Susie King Taylor, who was a formerly enslaved woman who learned how to read. She lived in South Carolina, and she also was a nurse who served during the Civil War. She was the first woman to write, she was the first woman to write an autobiography about her time during the Civil War. And she gives testament to her time and her experiences working as a nurse in the Civil War and nursing a lot of the military folks during the Civil War. Her book is on view here at the museum. Also, there's the Brewster nurses, who were a group of African American nurses based in Florida. And Stephen takes 3 of the women from the group of this vintage photograph, and he paints them in this triptych using this gold leaf that is just gorgeous. It's just beautiful. We also explore other themes such as the construction of labor. We talk about enslavement, convict leasing, and chain gangs. And Stephen gives voice to those laborers who were working on the plantation. Stephen created 2 story quilts on Ona Judge. Ona Judge was an enslaved woman who was owned by President George Washington and Martha Washington, his wife. Ona Judge was Martha Washington's maidservant. Ona Judge was a teenager living in Philadelphia when George Washington was president. She escaped on a boat called the Nancy to New England, and President Washington pursued her up into his death in 1799. Ona Judge had a family. She was married, had 3 children, and she lived the rest of her life up in New England. But also before she passed, she told her story to a journalist, and she has an archive about her story and her life, working on the plantation in Virginia, and then also living and working for the Washingtons in Philadelphia. There are 3 works on view here called the Nurturers. They're actually educators. These are works that depict women educators. Women educators were the backbone for young children and adults prior to emancipation and learning. Also, during Reconstruction up through civil rights, you had the beginnings of the historically black colleges, which we call HBCUs. So we have Mary McLeod Bethune, who was from Florida, and she started a school for young girls, which then turned into a college called the Bethune College in Florida. We also have a new generation, which looks at life of African Americans in the early to mid 20th century. Stephen made this beautiful quilt called Dressing Up that highlights blues singers, actually female blues singers. He really sheds light on the blues singer Ma Rainey. Stephen shows her being carefully and tenderly tended to by 3 African-American men working in fashion. Stephen creates these beautiful shimmering dress out of these sequins fabric, and also has her in these lace gloves against the backdrop of this vibrant city life. We also have 2 figures that are very celebratory for us in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. One is of Miss Elsie Henderson. Elsie Henderson was a cook for Edgar Kaufman and his family at Falling Water, which was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright in Mill Falls, Pennsylvania. She worked for the Kaufmans in the 40s up and through the early 60s. She also cooked for other wealthy families in New England. She lived up until the age of 107. She passed away last year. And so Stephen renders her as this youthful woman, and she is lounging near a swimming pool. And she's dressed beautifully in this purple and white play suit, and she is gazing at the viewer and welcoming us to sit next to her in the open chair. We also have Charles Teeny Harris, who was a photographer in the early to mid 20th century. Teeny Harris photographed Black Americans in Pittsburgh from weddings to social events to sporting happenings, and really was able to document the beauty and the vitality of African Americans. And Stephen paints him sitting in this chair, holding this cute Samoyed dog, and impeccably dressed. And if you could really pay attention to his argyle socks, and also the watch that Stephen renders in this copper leaf. Stephen also creates these mixed media paintings called the Coal Miners. Stephen looks at West Virginia and the significance of African American coal miners and the role that they played in building the economy through coal. He portrays 6 individuals, each having their own painting, and Stephen uses mica as this reflective material that invokes them emerging out of a coal mine. And then instead of using these butterflies, Stephen has these canaries that kind of serve as a spiritual protective guide for the coal miners. So I think that having this show right now is just at a perfect time where we as a country are really at a precarious state, and at a time when we really look at our differences as being problematic, but this show really speaks to the power of how our differences really bring us together, and our shared experiences that we have in common really are amplified, that Stephen really brings to life here. So I couldn't think of a better place to have Stephen's show for people to enjoy is here in Boise. And the history of workers here in Boise, there are so many wonderful stories that I really look forward to hearing from visitors here. And so if you can't visit the Boise Art Museum, there's going to be a lot of information online. We have some wonderful books that have helped inform both Stephen's practice and my curatorial practice. So there's a recommended book list that will be available online if you're unable to come in to the museum. We also have some wonderful source material from archival images and also material that Stephen has used that went into his quilts and also his paintings that are situated in a couple of the display cases here. You'll also have the opportunity to hear some audio about certain works in the show. So I really welcome you to come see for yourself and experience Stephen Towns' Declaration and Resistance.